Hey there, thanks for tuning in. Let's set the scene. You're enjoying a string of eerie stories about haunted office buildings, creepy old libraries, maybe even a ghost lurking in a quiet florist's shop. And then, out of left field, chupacabra. Yeah, we're mixing it up today. This episode is a strange brew of terrifying workplace encounters, ghostly happenings, and one unexpected cryptid cameo. It's random, it's creepy, it's exactly what you didn't know you needed. So kick back, turn the lights down, and get ready for some chilling tales from the 9 to 5. And hey, if you've ever had a job that gave you goosebumps for reasons other than your boss, maybe your story's next. Let's get into it. These are tales from the break room. Story 1. Summer of the Chupacabra from WW. Winfrey I grew up on. Our family farm in Chihuahua, about hours south of Suarez. It wasn't large by commercial standards, but to us children it seemed to stretch forever acres of hard work and family. History. My father, Roelio, inherited the land from his father, who had built the modest adobe house where I spent my childhood with my parents, my older brother Ernesto, and my younger sister, Dulce. Our lives revolved around the seasons. We grew corn beans and chilies, primarily with a small orchard of peach and apple trees near the house. We also kept chickens, goats, and a few cattle that grazed in the eastern field. My earliest memories are of trailing behind my mother Valentina as she harvested vegetables, my small hands learning to test for ripeness and my eyes watching for pests. By the time I was expected to work alongside everyone else. Our house sat at the northern edge of our property, a single-story structure with thick walls that kept us cool in summer and trapped the heat from our wood stove in winter. Behind the house stood my father's workshop and the chicken coop. To the west lay the main fields, to the south the orchard, and to the east the grazing land and an old barn. Beyond our boundaries to the north stretched the land of the Morales family, who we rarely saw, and to the south untamed desert scrubland that eventually rose into foothills. I was during the summer that changed everything. The summer of that year had been particularly dry, and we had been working twice as hard to keep our crops from failing. Perhaps it was the drought that drove it to our farm. Perhaps it was something else entirely. Whatever the reason that was, the summer our peaceful existence was shattered by what my abuela Emelda would eventually insist was a chupacabra. The first strange occurrence happened in early June. It wasn't dramatic, just unsettling in a way I couldn't explain. I had gone to collect eggs from the chicken coop early one morning. Usually the chickens would be clucking and bustling about, but that morning they were silent and huddled in the corner of the coop. Trembling, I assumed a coyote or fox had been prowling nearby and frightened them. But when I checked around the coop, found no tracks, only a strange sweet sour odor like rotting fruit mixed with copper. The chickens refused to leave the coop all day, and we gathered half our usual number of eggs. My father examined the area carefully but found nothing conclusive. He suggested it might be a mountain lion passing through, though he seemed puzzled by the lack of tracks. That night, he loaded his old rifle and kept it by the door just in case. Life continued normally for about weeks. The incident with the chickens wasn't forgotten, but it faded beneath the constant demands of farm work. Then came the second incident, the minor one that we almost dismissed, but that later took on new significance. One morning, my brother Ernesto noticed that someone had been in the orchard overnight. Several peaches had been picked from various trees, not in clusters as a human would harvest, but individual fruits selected apparently at random throughout the orchard. What made it strange was that there were no footprints, and some of the chosen peaches had been from the highest branches that even my father struggled to reach without a ladder. Ernesto asked if I had been sneaking fruit. I hadn't. None of us had. My father wondered if the Morales children had come onto our property, though it seemed unlikely. When I accompanied my mother to their farm to ask, Senora Morales seemed offended at the suggestion and assured us that her children had been at home all night. On our walk back, my mother confided that she didn't believe it was children at all. She had found 3 of the stolen peaches discarded near the edge of the property, each with just a single unusual bite taken out of it. She showed me one she had brought along. The bite wasn't from human teeth. It looked more like a puncture with two prominent holes, surrounded by smaller marks. That night I had trouble sleeping. The windows in my room faced the orchard, and I kept imagining shapes moving between the trees. The moonlight cast strange shadows, and every rustling leaf seemed to hide something watching and waiting. I finally fell asleep with my blanket pulled over my head. Something I hadn't done since I was a little girl. The third incident occurred in mid-July, and there was no dismissing it as anything ordinary. We kept goats at that time, including 2 new kids born that spring. They were kept in a pen adjacent to the barn at night, with access to the eastern pasture during the day. One morning my father went to let them out as usual, and found the gate to their pen hanging open inside 7 of the goats were huddled in the corner, making distressed sounds I had never heard before, a high-pitched whine that raised the hair on my arms. 3 goats were missing, including one of the kids. My father called for Ernesto, and they set out to search the property. While my mother tried to calm the remaining animals, I stayed with her, and that's when we noticed the blood. Not a lot, just small dark droplets leading from the pen toward the southern boundary of our farm where the desert began. I asked my mother what could have happened. She said she wasn't sure, but her face had gone pale, and she made this sign of the cross when she thought I wasn't looking. My father and Ernesto returned mid-afternoon, grim-faced and exhausted. They had found the 3 goats almost a mile into the desert. Rather, they had found what remained of them I wasn't allowed to see, but I overheard my father telling my mother that they had been drained of blood with the same paired puncture wounds we had seen on the peaches, but larger and more numerous. There were no signs of the bodies being eaten, just systematically drained. The corpses were completely dry. That night we locked all the animals into the barn, even the chickens. My father and Ernesto took turns keeping watch from the porch with the rifle. I watched from my window as they passed a thermos of coffee between them, their faces illuminated briefly when they lit cigarettes, a habit my father had quit years before but resumed that night. The next day my father drove into town and returned with heavy chains and better locks for all the outbuildings. He also brought back Tio Mateo, my mother's brother, who worked as a ranger in the nearby national park. My uncle had experience with predators and knew the local wildlife better than anyone. He examined the remaining evidence, the strange tracks my father had found near the goat pen, the peculiar pattern of the wounds as my father described them. I sat on the porch steps pretending to shell peas while listening to their conversation. My uncle said he had never seen an animal kill like this, not in years of working in the wilderness. Mountain lions, wolves, coyotes they killed to eat. This was something else. He mentioned that there had been similar incidents reported further south near his park. Livestock killed, drained of blood, always with the same distinctive wounds. Some of the local ranchers were saying it was a chupacabra. My father laughed through the sound, held no humor. He said those were just stories to frighten children. Uncle didn't argue, but he didn't laugh either. He stayed with us that night, and the 2 men sat up with their rifles and a bottle of tequila between them. For almost weeks, nothing happened. Heightened vigilance continued, but as days passed without incident, we began to relax slightly. My abuela arrived for her annual summer visit, bringing with her small cloth bags of herbs and salt that she hung over every doorway. Despite my father's protests, she took one look at the nervous animals and declared that a chupacabra had marked our farm as its territory. My father told her not to fill our heads with superstition, but she ignored him and continued placing her protective herbs. The 4th incident, the one that would haunt my dreams for years, happened during a new moon in early August, when the night was as dark as it ever got. I had been sleeping fitfully in the summer heat when a sound woke me, a scratching at my window, like branches in the wind. Except there was no wind that night. No trees grew close enough to touch the house. I lay frozen in my bed, listening as the scratching moved slowly across the glass. Then it stopped, and I heard another sound, a soft, rhythmic hissing, almost like labored breathing, against every instinct screaming at me to hide under my covers. I turned my head toward The window. The darkness outside was nearly complete, but as my eyes adjusted, I could make out a shape darker than the night around it, pressed against my window. It wasn't large, perhaps the size of a medium dog, but its proportions were all wrong. Its head seemed too big for its body, with a pointed snout or beak. What looked like spines ran down its back, and its limbs were long and thin, ending in what appeared to be claws that were dragging slowly across my window glass. Couldn't see its eyes until it moved its head slightly, and then I wished I hadn't. They caught what little ambient light there was glowing a dull red like dying embers. The creature remained motionless for what felt like an eternity, as if aware I was watching it. Then suddenly dropped from sight. I finally found my voice and screamed my parents, and Ernesto came running, and through gasping sobs I told them what I had seen. My father checked outside, but found nothing except strange three-toed prints in the soft earth beneath my window, prints that seemed to disappear several feet away, as if the creature had simply vanished or taken flight. My Abua Emelda took charge then. She moved my mattress to the main room where I would sleep for the remainder of the summer. She burned sage and copal in every room and placed bowls of vinegar on all the windowsills, saying that chupacabras hated the smell. My father no longer argued with her. That night I heard him and my uncle discussing reinforcing all the windows with metal screens. The final and most terrifying incident occurred 3 nights later. We're all sleeping in the main room by then. My parents on their bed moved from their bedroom, Ernesto on the old couch, Dulce and I on our mattresses on the floor, and Abuela Alda in her rocking chair refusing to sleep. My uncle Mateo kept watch on the porch. I woke to the sound of our cattle bellowing in terror. My father and uncle grabbed their rifles and ran outside, while my mother blocked the doorway to prevent us children from following. Through the windows we could see the beams of their flashlights sweeping across the property toward the eastern field. Then came a sound I will never forget. A high-pitched shriek that was neither animal nor human echoing across our land. It was followed by shouts from my father and uncle, the crack of a rifle shot, and then silence. We waited in terrified suspense until they returned. Nearly an hour later, my father's shirt was torn and bloodied from a cut on his arm. My uncle looked shaken, his usual calm demeanor completely gone. When my mother asked what happened, my father simply shook his head and said they needed to call the authorities in the morning. It wasn't until years later that my uncle finally told me what they had seen. They had arrived at the cattle pen to find one of our cows on the ground, already dead, with the same wounds as the goats. As they examined it, movement caught their attention. In the beam of their flashlights, not eft away, stood a creature like nothing they had ever seen. It stood on 2 legs like a man, but was the size of a large dog. Its skin was grey and hairless, with what looked like spines or quills along its back. Its head was oversized with an elongated jaw, filled with needle-like teeth, and its eyes reflected their flashlight beams like pools of blood. Most disturbing were its front limbs too, long for its body, ending in 3-fingered hands with curved claws dripping with dark liquid. When their lights hit it, the creature shrieked and leaped not away, but toward them. My uncle fired, and the creature veered off, disappearing into the darkness at a speed that seemed impossible. They tracked it to the southern boundary, where its prints simply ended in the middle of open ground, as if it had vanished or taken flight. The authorities came the next day, but they called it an animal attack, probably a diseased coyote or feral dog. They took statements and left, clearly dismissing my family's account of what we had seen and experienced. We lost no more animals that summer. My abuela's herbs remained hanging in every doorway, and my father installed metal screens over all the windows. When September came, I returned to school carrying the secret knowledge that there are things in this world that defy explanation. I am now with children of my own. We live in the city, far from my parents' farm, which they eventually sold years after that summer. Sometimes on particularly dark nights, I wake to the sound of scratching at my window, only to find nothing there, and I always sleep with my windows locked and curtains drawn. Some people say the chupacabra is just a myth, A story created to explain the mundane. Perhaps they're right. But I know what I saw that summer, what my family experienced, and on nights when the moon is new and the darkness seems alive, I wonder if it's still out there searching for sustenance, moving silently through the desert night. I still don't know what it was with certainty. But I do know this. I will never forget the summer the chupacabra came to our farm, student old man and room with the brown. Story 2. Museum Hauntings by Yangam. I've always believed in the paranormal. Ever since I was a kid, I devoured every creepy book and ghost story I could get my hands on, campfire tales, horror anthologies, urban legends, you name it. But despite my obsession, I'd never had a real tangible experience. Sure, I'd seen strange shapes in my peripheral vision, or felt uneasy in certain places, but I always convinced myself it was my imagination. That is, until a few years ago, just before the pandemic, when everything changed. Back then, I landed a clerical job at the Center for Cultural Affairs of my alma mater. It was a decent gig. The department oversaw 3 cultural performance groups, a marching band, a choral group, and a traditional dance troupe. Because the members were all students or part-time trainers, and our director was almost always off handling other projects, I usually found myself alone in the office. But the office wasn't in some bustling hallway or on a modern campus floor. No, our workplace was an old, repurposed house situated well outside the main university grounds. The building itself had a long history. It was once a privately owned family residence built during the World War II era. After the original owners migrated abroad, the university bought the property when it was just a fledgling institution. For a time, it served as an elementary school back in the 60s, until that department was relocated to the main campus. Afterward, the building sat abandoned for over a decade, slowly decaying, until the university decided to renovate it and convert it into a cultural mini-museum. Our office ended up on the 2nd floor. To really grasp what happened to me, you need to understand the layout. The house was a classic colonial 2-story structure made almost entirely of dark wood. It had enormous windows with slatted wooden shutters that opened outward, wrapping around both levels. On the 1st floor, there was a main hall used for rotating art exhibits. Visiting artists could rent the space to host their shows. To the left of the hall was a door that led to a compact kitchen and dining nook, which also housed the comfort rooms. To the right was a wooden staircase leading to the 2nd floor, where our department's office was tucked beside another gallery space. At the very back of that level, there was a metal emergency exit stairwell leading down to the garden. At first, the job was quiet and uneventful. I enjoyed the solitude. But what started to bother me were the reactions I'd get when I told people where I worked. Every time I was introduced to a new colleague on the main campus, they'd give me a look and ask, "So, have you experienced anything strange over there yet?" I laughed it off at first, thinking it was just some campus legend or running joke. But almost everyone I met asked the same question, always the same way. Eventually I stopped paying it any mind. That is, until the strange things began. It started about a month in. It was a quiet afternoon, and I was getting ready to lock up for the day. The sun was beginning to dip low, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. I had just secured the windows and was about to step out the front door when I felt the sudden urge to use the bathroom. I turned around and headed back into the now dim building. I didn't bother turning on the lights. The last of the sun gave enough glow to see my way. I walked to the bathroom, opened the old creaky door, and stepped inside. The layout of the bathroom was simple. Toilet straight ahead, sink to the right. I closed the door behind me and, out of habit, turned the lock. I turned toward the toilet, lifted the lid, and then turned again to sit down, and froze. The door was wide open, just standing there, ajar, as if it had never been touched. But I knew I had locked it. And that door was noisy, so loud, in fact, that I'd often hear it creak open or shut even from the 2nd floor. Yet I hadn't heard a single sound. Not a click, not a creak. Nothing. My skin prickled, my heart pounded, and then, without even thinking, I whispered aloud, "Can I just use the bathroom real quick? I promise I'll leave when I'm done." Yeah, I actually said that out loud. I closed the door again, finished my business as fast as humanly possible, and bolted from the house. not once daring to look behind me. I didn't want to know what or who I might see. After that, the incidents came sporadically but persistently. I'd be working at my desk and hear the unmistakable sound of footsteps, old wooden floorboards creaking under invisible weight, echoing through the halls, even though I was alone. Sometimes I'd hear someone ascending the stairs, but when I peeked down, no one would be there. One time, while sweeping the exhibit space, I noticed a massive picture frame start to vibrate violently on the wall. It was huge, solid wood and thick glass, much too heavy to shift from something as gentle as a broom brushing nearby. I stood there, broom in hand, staring at the trembling frame. No other frames in the room moved, just that one. I briefly considered whether a small tremor had occurred, but everything else was still. My rationalizations were running out. But the worst part, the most unsettling constant of all, was the feeling. The unshakable, ever-present sensation that I wasn't alone, that something else was there, watching me, breathing down my neck, observing. Still, I managed to grow used to it. It became part of my routine, like creaky furniture or flickering lights in an old house. I learned to ignore it, or at least pretend to. Then came the story that rattled me to my core. One afternoon, I wandered out to the front gate to chat with the security guard on duty. She was a kind, older woman, mid-50s, maybe, who I'd grown friendly with over the weeks. As we chatted, she paused and lowered her voice. "You know," she said quietly, "something happened yesterday that's been bothering me." She explained that while she was sitting in the security station, casually writing in the logbook, she looked up at the second-floor windows of the house and saw me, or what she thought was me. She said she clearly saw a woman in a white dress walking across the second-floor gallery from one window to the next. She could even describe the movement, the slow, steady steps. Then, less than a minute later, she heard laughter coming from the ground floor. She looked down, and there I was, chatting with a visiting part-time staff member. I wasn't wearing a dress that day, and definitely not a white one. Horrified, she looked back up to the second floor, but the figure had vanished. She instinctively crossed herself and muttered a prayer. As she told me this, I felt my blood run cold. The air seemed to tighten around me. It wasn't just that someone saw something odd. It was that the thing had looked like me. It had worn my face. I didn't sleep well for nights after that. Not long after, the pandemic hit. We shifted to remote work, and the museum was closed indefinitely. Months later, when we were finally allowed to return, I was reassigned to a different department within the main campus. I haven't stepped foot in that house since, and I don't think I ever will. Not after learning that whatever haunts that place doesn't just linger in the shadows. It becomes you. Story 3. Door from White Monster. I am a third-year medical student, and I want to share my story with you. First of all, I want to say that until this point in my life, I never did believe in supernatural stuff like monsters or werewolves or skinwalkers. I considered myself a man of logic, and this stuff just didn't fit common sense. On the other hand, my good friend, actually my best friend Jan, was another story. You see, he always loved and naturally believed in supernatural stuff. But years ago, just when I returned to our hometown after finishing my first year of medical school, he started to act weird and talking nonsense. He would always have some conspiracy theories from time to time, but this was different. You see, unlike me, he didn't know which college to enroll in, so he got a job instead. His family helped him get a job in a company called Certis Surveillance, which deals with the installation of video surveillance in various places. But here's where things get strange. After my return, Jan and I went out for a cup of coffee to catch up. Of course, we were talking during the year while I was away, but virtual chat and communication can't replace real life hanging out. Am I right? It was during that meeting when he started to talk about a bunch of weird stuff. He said the company owner, Miles, who hired him, isn't the nice guy he seems. He said that in his office he has some kind of red door. What kind of red door? I asked him, a little bit confused. He then told me that Miles had one rule, and that was not to go in that room. But curiosity got the better of him, and one day when Miles wasn't in his office, he entered the room and claims to have encountered some kind of demon. Inside, he added that he saw a bunch of weird symbols and blood inside that room. Too naturally, I started to laugh, thinking he was joking with me, but then I looked right into his eyes, and all I saw was pure fear. Well, he was my friend, so I wanted to believe him, but the story seemed just too unrealistic. I mean, a guy, an owner of a video surveillance company basically, surrounded by cameras, has a demon in his office, in the room with the red door. Seems like a bad joke, if you ask me. Jan was pissed off because I didn't believe him, but he said he would get proof of the things he claimed. 2 years went by after our conversation, and every time we talked after that, Jan would bring up some new theories about things he saw. It didn't bother me, I just thought Jan was getting a little obsessed with it, but recently I had my own experience with stuff I just can't explain, with stuff that made me a believer. I already mentioned that I am a third-year medical student. Well, my story is very simple. Ever since I can remember, I've wanted to be a doctor. I think it's my grandmother's fault. You see, she was a nurse and would always tell me interesting stories that happened to her in the hospital. She would also teach me the names of bones and different body parts in Latin. Either way, by the time I started high school, I knew my true and only path was medicine. Let me tell you, medical school is no joke. It was intense from day one. The first year was especially brutal. Many students call the first year the anatomy year because it's the main subject of the first year and very hard to pass. Spent hours and hours and hours studying all the muscles, nerves and blood vessels. But in the end, my hard work combined with my grandmother's fundamentals helped me get an A in anatomy. Getting an A in anatomy also gives you an opportunity to work in a dissection hall as an assistant. This job was reserved for top students, a way to sharpen our skills. While earning some extra cash to help with student life, I live as a subtenant near a tram station so I could get to my college in minutes. At worst, I accepted this job without hesitation. The man lending me an apartment was an older gentleman. We'll call him Mr. Healthy. Mr. Healthy was the type of guy that would constantly complain about everything, especially my lifestyle. You see, Mr. Healthy was allergic to unhealthy food, especially greasy food. During my late-night studies, I would often go out to grab a quick slice of pizza, which naturally Mr. Healthy didn't like. He wasn't a fan of my cleaning either, but he was renting the apartment for a very good price, and it was, as I said, in a pretty good location, so I just ignored him for most of the time, and from time to time he would bring me his healthy vegetable lunch, which I guess was nice of him. My role as an assistant was to assist first-year students during their anatomy practicals, guiding them through the maze of muscles and nerves and vessels. I would demonstrate proper dissection techniques, explain anatomical structures in detail and answer their questions. It was fulfilling work, both for my knowledge and my wallet. The dissection hall was located in an old building next to the college. In order to enter the dissection hall, you would need to pass through old brown wooden doors. Those doors were so massive and heavy that opening them was a little workout for the students. I remember the first time I saw those brown doors. Their brown paint was worn and chipped from years of use and the sound they made. Those doors groaned like a wounded animal whenever you opened or closed them. Behind those doors was the dissection hall. The dissection hall itself was an eerie place. The cold, sterile air clung to you whenever you were in there, and the faint, sharp scent of formaldehyde always seemed to follow you home. The room had large metal tables, each fitted with a drainage system, and cabinets filled with preserved specimens. Let's just say you wouldn't like to be in there alone at night. I wasn't working alone in the dissection hall I worked under. Let's call him Mr. B, a seasoned anatomy instructor who had been at the university for years. Mr. B was a strange man, don't get me wrong. Mr. B was brilliant and deeply knowledgeable, but also very odd. I always felt strange vibes when I was near him, you know, like the ones that send chills down your spine. He rarely smiled, and his gaze lingered too long on things, be it students or cadavers or even me. Once I caught him whispering to a preserved hand in a specimen jar, but I quickly brushed it off, linking it with my lack of sleep. Despite that, I admired him. He taught me dissection techniques that weren't even in textbooks, showing me tricks to reveal delicate nerve branches or hidden muscle layers. He made anatomy feel like an art form, and for that I respected him deeply. But on the other hand, his approach to dissection seemed a little weird. I'm not quick to judge, but getting so passionate about cutting dead bodies seems a little weird to me. Mr. Healthy, whom I would talk to from time to time, had a theory about Mr. B. You see, Mr. Healthy would start. You said Mr. B is a divorced man. Well, loneliness can drive a man insane. Maybe he's just lonely, and anatomy is his escape from harsh reality. So listen to me, young man. Find a girl as soon as possible and marry her. Understand? Here he goes again with his life advice, I thought. But on the other hand, Mr. Healthy had a point. Mr. B was a divorced man, pushing his S with no children. God knows if he had friends outside of work. Maybe anatomy and those dead bodies were his escape from real-life problems. Unfortunately for me, the strange vibes coming off Mr. B proved to be correct. You see, I wasn't always studying at my apartment. I would occasionally stay at my college's library. It had very comfy chairs, and I could use all sorts of books that they don't let students borrow because they're rare and expensive. One could argue that in these modern days you can find everything you need on the internet or just ask AI, but I am a bit of a bookworm. I like reading books and studying from scripts, so the library was my go-to place. One evening I stayed late in the library. I had an important test in pathology coming, and I wanted to be prepared. After I finally finished studying, I quickly got my stuff and left the college. But just as I was passing the old building with the dissection hall, I noticed that lights were on. Inside. Strange. What is Mr. B doing so late in there? Or is it just the janitor? Cleaning, I thought to myself. I was already starting to walk again to the tram station, located near the college, when curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to check it out. While I was approaching the building, I thought that Mr. B was probably just preparing the dissection hall for tomorrow's lessons, maybe organizing specimens, so I wasn't nervous about checking things out. As I entered the building, I noticed that those heavy brown doors leading into the dissection hall were slightly open, and there was a sound coming out of the dissection hall. I heard wet squelching, noises like someone chewing on something thick and juicy. Curious to see what was going on, I approached the door, leaned closer, and placed my ear against the door. The sound was unmistakable. Those were flesh-tearing and eating noises with occasional slurping sounds. I should have walked away. Every atom in my body was telling me just to get out of the building and pretend this had not happened. But we people are interesting beings. We are prepared to do almost anything just to satisfy our needs. In my case, my big curiosity. By this time you can guess what I did. I peeked through a slightly open door, and what I saw behind those brown doors will haunt me for the rest of my life, and possibly even after. You see, what I saw was Mr. B crouching over one of the cadavers. In his hands, Mr. B was holding a part of a human liver. He started stuffing it into his mouth and eating it like there was no tomorrow. It seemed like he would start choking on it at any moment. His face was covered in blood and other bodily fluids. Another thing I noticed was his eyes. They lost all color and looked more gray, and his pupils were either extremely dilated or just gone replaced by pure gray. And I swear then that his teeth even looked sharper than they should be. He looked like a starving animal, grunting and snorting between bites. The corpse on the table, the one I had helped prepare just a few days earlier, was mutilated beyond recognition. The ribs were cracked open, and organs lay scattered on the steel tray beside him. For the first few moments I just stood there completely frozen. I knew I had to run as far as possible from that place, but I can't explain what happened at that moment. I felt like fear took away my legs. I started breathing heavily. My legs started to shake as I could feel sweat dripping down my forehead. At that moment I probably leaned too hard on the door, and the door creaked. A split second after that, Mr. B's head snapped towards me. I quickly hid behind the door, praying that I had not been seen. A few seconds after that, I heard him walking towards the door. Immediately started to run towards the exit of the old building and towards the tram station. Perhaps God was watching over me, because just as I reached the tram station, a tram arrived and I entered. As the doors of the tram closed, I noticed a human-like shadow standing a few feet away from the tram station. As soon as I got off the tram, I started running, and I didn't stop until I reached my apartment. My heart was pounding so fast. I slammed the door shut and bolted every lock. I stood in the silence for what felt like hours before I finally calmed down. He couldn't have followed me. The tram is much too fast. I should be safe. He doesn't know where I live. I thought to myself at that moment. Mr. Healthy came out of his room. Dear boy, you finally came. Where were you? What happened to you? You look terrible. Just as I was going to tell him what I saw, someone had started to pound heavily on the door. I peeked through the peephole, and there he was. He almost looked like a zombie out there. Mr. B's body was covered in blood, and parts of what I presumed were organ leftovers. Who is it? Mr. Healthy asked me. Step back and call the police. There's no time, I shouted at him. Perhaps it was the tone of my voice, or maybe the pure fear in my eyes, but Mr. Healthy didn't even try to complain, and he did what I asked. The pounding on the door stopped after about minutes, and the police showed up quickly after that. They searched the university and questioned faculty, but Mr. Bai then had disappeared without a trace. No one had seen him since that night. The dissection hall was closed for weeks. Afterward, and rumors spread among the students, though no one seemed to know the truth. The university quietly claimed Mr. B had left due to personal reasons. For weeks I was shocked, trying to logically explain what happened that night. Even Mr. Healthy wasn't easy. He even changed the lock on the door. I couldn't sleep for days because every time I closed my eyes I saw Mr. B again, devouring human flesh. This experience made me realize sometimes there are things out there that you can't explain. Not with logic. Maybe Jan was right. Maybe he really did have an encounter with a demon. Maybe I'll give him a call. Story 4. The Haunted Flower Shop by Dodoko. I've been working at this charming little flower shop tucked away in a quiet part of town for just over a year now. It's not just a job. It's become a comforting routine, a slice of peace in an otherwise chaotic world. I share this space with my boyfriend, Sebastian, and his mother, Elizabeth, who owns the shop. Sebastian usually handles the front, ringing up customers, helping them pick the perfect arrangements, and chatting with our regulars like he's known them for years. He has this way of making people feel at home. Meanwhile, I work behind the scenes in the back room, surrounded by the earthy scent of soil and the vibrant chaos of petals. My job involves making bouquets, trimming stems, arranging displays, and caring for the plants that fill the shop with life. Occasionally, we get special requests for weddings or funerals, and those are my favorite. There's something deeply satisfying about crafting an arrangement that will carry someone's emotions when words fall short. Elizabeth takes care of the paperwork, invoices, and all the bureaucratic red tape neither of us wants to touch. She's good at it. Practical, no nonsense, the type of woman who's seen a lot and lets little faze her. For the first time in my life, I actually enjoy going to work. I wake up eager to start the day, to breathe in the mingled perfume of roses, lilies, and eucalyptus, to feel the soft petals against my fingertips. Working with flowers feels like working with small, delicate pieces of magic, and doing it alongside the people I love makes it all the more special. But a few months ago, things started to shift. It began subtly, just a strange smell that would linger for a few seconds whenever I passed through the door connecting the front shop to the back workspace. It wasn't unpleasant, just odd. Not the kind of fragrance you'd expect in a flower shop. It would fade quickly, gone before I could place it, but it kept happening, again and again. I chalked it up to my imagination at first, or maybe a weird draft stirring up some old scent, but it kept happening, and one day I finally recognized it. Balloon flower, Platycodon grandiflorus if you want to get technical. We keep a few rows of them at the far end of the back area, mostly white ones. They're popular for flower beds and minimalist garden setups. Their scent is usually faint, only really noticeable when the petals are crushed. And yet, somehow, that distinct earthy sweetness was wafting all the way to the front door. It didn't make sense, but I brushed it off. A weird little mystery in a flower shop didn't seem like anything to worry about. Until the other things started. I began feeling sudden, inexplicable chills that would pass through the room like a breeze, even when the windows were shut tight. At times, I'd catch the sharp, gut-twisting scent of decay, something rotting, like wet leaves left to fester. The flowers closest to the back wall began to wilt faster than usual. Then the arrangements near the shop's entrance started doing the same. They'd look fresh and beautiful in the morning, only to appear droopy and sickly a few hours later. Sebastian noticed too. One evening, while we were locking up, he admitted something that made my blood run cold. He kept smelling smoke. Not cigarette smoke or incense, but the distinct metallic scent of something burning, and it always came from the back room. He said it started happening a few times a day, and at first he'd rush to open the door and check, but he'd never find anything. No singed petals, no scorched wires, no melted plastic, nothing. I figured if something was really burning, he told me, you or Elizabeth would have noticed before I did. But it got worse. Whatever was happening in our shop wasn't just annoying anymore. It was starting to affect our livelihood. The flowers were decaying faster than we could explain, faster than we could replace them. Elizabeth began taking matters into her own hands, inspecting every stem, testing the soil, checking our delivery boxes. She even swapped suppliers, but it made no difference. Some flowers seemed to rot overnight, as if touched by something poisonous. Then there was the whispering. Sebastian told me he had started hearing faint voices, not loud, not clear, just whispers, like someone mumbling nonsense under their breath. He'd only hear it when the shop was completely quiet, and he couldn't make out any words. It was like a radio just out of tune. The worst part, he said it didn't sound human. By then, I was fully unsettled. My rational mind tried to write it all off. Bad plumbing, stress, faulty wiring, maybe mold. But deep down, I knew it was something else. The way the cold air would hit you out of nowhere. The way your skin prickled when you walked past the back door. The way the balloon flower scent kept returning, stronger and stranger every time. Elizabeth, usually so grounded and skeptical, began acting differently too. One morning we came in and found the shop transformed. Every windowsill was lined with small bowls of black and purple crystals. White stones sat nestled among the flower pots. Strands of rosemary and thyme dangled from hooks and shelves. Pieces of parchment covered in hand-drawn sigils had been taped to the wooden ceiling beams. And in the back, where the chill was strongest, Elizabeth had hung clusters of fabric-wrapped charms in every corner. Sebastian looked around, eyes wide, and muttered, "Mom, this is a little much." But even he didn't protest too hard, because deep down, he felt it too. Something unnatural was with us, something not meant to be in a flower shop. And then, it stopped. Just like that. The smells vanished. The chill faded. The flowers started lasting again. There were no more whispers, no more burning scents. The whole shop felt lighter, like someone had opened a window and let the darkness out. It's been a few months now. Everything's back to normal. Customers are happy. The flowers are healthy. Sebastian laughs more. Elizabeth hums while she works, and I'm back to loving every minute of my job. But sometimes, when I walk past the balloon flowers, I swear I can still catch the faintest trace of that strange crushed petal smell. And I can't help but wonder what really happened in our little flower shop. Story 5. Lone stretch of lost roads. It was a cold, clear night in rural Virginia when I found myself behind the wheel of my truck, making my way down the winding roads of Pounding Mill. The sky stretched above me in a blanket of dark, only punctuated by the dim glow of the headlights cutting through the night. I've been a truck driver for years, but this stretch of road always felt different, quieter somehow, like it was hiding secrets in the hills and valleys just beyond my reach. I could almost feel the weight of history in the air. This wasn't just any run. Gizmo, my cat, was curled up in the passenger seat, most likely deep in dreamland as he always was during my night shifts. The only sounds besides the hum of the engine were the occasional creak of the truck's frame and the soft, rhythmic breathing of the cat. I liked the solitude. There was something peaceful about the night shift, a serenity that came with the lonely stretches of asphalt, surrounded by nothing but thick woods and the occasional farmhouse, long since abandoned or neglected. But tonight, I wasn't just heading to the usual deliveries. My boss had called me up earlier, the grumpy old man barking orders as usual. He had me deliver some heavier packages for the local post office in Pounding Mill. Of course, I was the lucky one. Who else was around? Not that I had much to do, just twiddling my thumbs in the depot while I waited for dispatch. I'd left Gizmo in the cab, knowing he'd be fine for a while. I made sure he had food, water, and a litter box. That cat could hardly be bothered when I wasn't around. He was the one who usually made sure I was awake and alert during the day, pestering me for attention as if his life depended on it. I didn't mind. I loved that cat, even if he was a bit of a handful. I headed to the post office in Pounding Mill, where the world seemed stuck in a time warp. The streets were quiet, with no sign of life beyond the occasional flicker of a porch light or the distant chirping of crickets. The wind rustled through the trees, cool and refreshing. It felt like I was stepping into another world, far removed from the hustle and bustle of the city. I walked into the post office, took the keys that had been left out for me, and climbed into the well-worn postal truck parked outside. I didn't mind the small-town deliveries. They kept me busy. This town may be small, but it sure had its quirks. I often got lost on these winding back roads. Without fail, my GPS was my best friend, especially in places like these, where every twist and turn could lead to an entirely new world. I set myself up in the driver's seat, the GPS map showing me my route for the night. Despite the fact that it was the middle of the night, I was wired. I'd barely slept, having spent the day playing with Gizmo, who insisted on it, and fighting off the exhaustion that came with the late shifts. I'd stocked up on Red Bull, Monster, and energy shots to keep me awake. I knew I'd crash hard later, but I didn't have time to think about that. I needed to finish this job first. I set off, the engine rumbling beneath me, and soon the little town of Pounding Mill faded into the distance. The roads began to narrow, and the streetlights gave way to darkness. This was when the real adventure began. I was no stranger to these back roads, but some of the areas I was heading into were still uncharted for me. These homes were tucked away on long, winding dirt paths, and it was easy to feel like you were lost in the middle of nowhere. I drove down these forgotten roads, the wheels of the truck crunching against the old, beaten pavement. The houses I passed were old, some barely hanging on. Most had been neglected for years, the gardens overgrown, and the paint peeling from the wood. But tonight, something about it felt different. The air seemed thicker, heavier, and the silence was almost oppressive. I came to a road named Raven's Nest, which felt like it had been pulled right out of some dark fairy tale. The name alone made me uneasy, but I didn't have time to dwell on that. The house I pulled up to was old, the white paint faded to a yellowish hue from years of exposure. It sat on a large plot of land, its front yard overgrown and wild. I wasn't great with measurements, but the place looked massive, especially compared to the tiny, cramped spaces I usually saw. I wasn't sure what to expect from this delivery, but when I opened the back of the truck, I saw an unusual package, a massive, heavy wooden box. It was oddly shaped, and the smell of old, seasoned wood hit me the moment I touched it. It had brass handles on either side and a latch, but the whole thing was oddly out of place. It looked like a coffin. At first I thought maybe it was a joke or some kind of goth decoration, but the weight of it was unnerving. I loaded it onto the dolly and made my way toward the house. As I climbed the stairs to the front door, the box tipped slightly, and the tape along the top split open with the pressure. I took a deep breath and tried to ignore the odd feeling creeping up my spine. I was just being paranoid. It was just a package after all. But then, as I knocked on the door with the heavy metal knocker, I began to wonder about the house and the people living in it. The door opened slowly, and a woman stood before me, looking almost like a vision from a dream. She was tall, with long, dark hair that had a streak of purple at the bottom, and her blue eyes were striking, almost hypnotic. I blinked, trying to focus. "Thanks," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. "I've been waiting on this hope chest forever." I blinked, confused. "Hope chest? You sure this isn't a coffin?" She gave me a look, frowning slightly. "It's a hope chest. Quilts, blankets, sometimes clothes go in them. Old-fashioned, I know, but I like it." I laughed nervously, unsure what to say. "Yeah, sorry. Just thought it looked a little ominous." She didn't seem offended. In fact, she looked amused, which made me feel a little better. But then she gestured to the dolly and asked, "Can you help me bring it in? I don't have anything to move it with." I hesitated. Technically, I wasn't supposed to go inside, but she looked so embarrassed, and I could tell she wasn't used to asking for help. Plus, I'd had worse things happen on deliveries. I shrugged and followed her inside. The house was strange. It was dimly lit and the air smelled musty. The floors creaked beneath my boots as I followed her down a narrow hallway toward the basement door. "This is where I want it," she said, her voice soft and even. I helped her get the chest to its designated spot, and she smiled up at me with gratitude. "Thank you," she said. "I have some deer meat in the freezer downstairs. Want some as a thank you?" I hesitated for a moment, but I was tired, and I didn't want to seem rude. Against my better judgment, I agreed and followed her downstairs. The basement was unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was dark and damp, the air thick with the smell of rot and something worse. The walls had collapsed in some places, and pipes hung loosely from the ceiling. My stomach churned as I looked around, the sight enough to make my skin crawl. I could barely see the freezer in the corner, but something about it felt wrong, like the entire basement had been abandoned in a hurry. I turned to leave, but the door to the basement slammed shut behind me with a loud bang. I rushed to the door, banging on it, but there was no answer. My heart began to race as I noticed the smoke filling the room. I could hear the faint crackle of flames in the vents above. Panic rose in my chest, and I had to act fast. With adrenaline coursing through my veins, I grabbed a broken shelf and used it to smash a window. The glass shattered around me as I forced my body through, cutting myself on the shards. I didn't care. I ran, my feet pounding against the gravel as I made it back to my truck, the sound of her frantic laughter echoing behind me. I didn't look back. I floored the truck, speeding through the winding roads until I reached the nearest clinic, where I collapsed in the lobby. They treated me for my cuts and fractures, and when I woke up, I learned that the police had investigated the house. No one had lived there in years, and they found the charred remains of the basement. The hope chest was actually a coffin, one that had been waiting for someone like me. I took the vacation my boss reluctantly gave me and spent the next few weeks recovering. The incident stayed with me, though, and one thing's for sure, never, ever go into someone's basement. Even if they offer you something nice, trust your instincts. I'm just glad I didn't become another missing person in a town that time forgot. Story 6. Barreling down the highway at over 90 mph with no real destination, Frank Marsherton pressed harder on the gas pedal. Ghastly blue moonlight revealed stretches of farmland around him as he took another pull from his beer. The windows were down. Cold night air rushed across his face, but it didn't sober him. Beer dropped from his chin, and he wiped it lazily with the sleeve of his blue flannel before tossing the empty can onto the passenger floorboard. Resting on the seat was a manila envelope that changed everything. He grabbed another beer from the six-pack, just 2 left. His eyes flicked to the envelope, and his grip on the wheel tightened. She didn't even have the courage to tell me herself, he thought. She sent some chicken-shit lawyer to deliver the papers. The speedometer crept toward 100. The road climbed into a low hill, and Frank stayed on the gas, engine roaring under him. As he crested the hill, headlights caught a flickering neon sign in the distance, Restmore Inn, vacancy, perched beside a lonely off-ramp, veering right into the dark. Frank jerked the wheel at the last second, tires shrieking as he slammed the brakes. The truck fishtailed, gravel spitting from the shoulder as he barely made the turn. Frank cursed as he fought the wheel, swerving down the ramp like a drunk roller coaster. As he pulled into the parking lot, the glowing red vacancy sign pulsed like a weak heartbeat. The place looked abandoned. No lights in the windows, no movement, just a dead silence as he rolled into the cracked gravel motor court. The motel attendant looked at Frank with suspicion as he stumbled to the counter. "I'd like a room for the night," Frank said, trying to sound sober. "Only got one left," the attendant replied, eyeing him. "Queen bed, $60, cash only." "That'll do," Frank muttered, fumbling through his wallet. He slid the bills across the counter, and the clerk dropped a metal room key into his hand. The worn tag read simply number 6. Paint peeled off the motel door with the weathered, rusted number 6 clinging stubbornly to the frame. A single window, glazed over from years of dirt and grime, sat to the right of the door. The motel was no showstopper, but it would do for the night. As Frank entered the room, the vacancy sign now pulsed red. No vacancy. He returned to the truck and grabbed the only things he had: a half-zipped backpack stuffed with a single change of clothes, 2 remaining cans of beer, and the manila envelope marked in block print, labeled Frank Marsherton. Frank sat on the edge of the bed, and for the first time all day, the silence and stillness gave him room to think. The weight of it all hit him fast. Tears welled up before he could stop them, and he naturally turned his head towards the wall, ashamed of how broken he felt. The more he tried to hold it in, the harder it was to swallow the rising tide, until it spilled out anyway. His body shook as grief finally took its turn. He wiped his eyes and reached for one of the last 2 beers. His fingers trembled, and the can slipped, clattering to the floor and rolling out of reach. It vanished beneath the bed. Frank groaned and leaned over. He dropped to the floor and lifted the bed covering, then froze. Something was down there. A shape, a gap in the floorboards. As soon as he thought his vision was messing with him, he heard it. A slow, scraping sound, followed by faint whispers from underneath the bed. He couldn't make out what was being said. He leaned in closer to decipher the strange whispers and heard it again. Scrape, scrape. A chill ran through him, and without thinking, he stood and shoved the bed to the side, the metal frame scraping against the floor like fingernails on a chalkboard. Staring back at him was a wooden-framed hatch where the bed once stood. The handle was made of iron and shaped like a ring, cold and black. Strange, ornate carvings wrapped around the edges of the hatch frame, symbols he didn't recognize but instinctively disliked. Frank gripped the iron ring and pulled. The hatch resisted like it hadn't been opened in decades, heavy, stubborn, groaning at every inch it gave up. As it creaked open, a wave of stale, musty air hit him in the face. He grabbed his cell phone and clicked on the flashlight. The beam reached the threshold, then stopped. It just vanished, as if the shadows beneath the hatch refused to be seen. He hesitated and jumped into the darkness, eventually swallowed by the void. The air grew colder, heavier. On the other side, the blackness thinned, revealing that he was strangely back in his room, but it was more grayscale. Everything was still in its place. The desk, the door, the bed, just all drained of color. The hatch beneath the bed was gone. In its place, clean hardwood. And there, just in front of the bed, was the perfectly still beer can on its side. He turned and looked up. In the ceiling, a dark void, outlined in the shape of the hatch, marked the way he had come. It was still there, an exit, and for now, that was enough. A flicker of resolve steadied him. Frank turned away and began to explore. Frank picked up the beer can from the floor and turned it over in his hand, eyeing it with suspicion. He cracked it open. The hiss sounded normal. He lifted it to his nose, and it still smelled like beer. Just as he raised it to his lips, a soft creak echoed from the front door. Frank froze. The door had opened, just slightly, but he hadn't touched it. Slowly pushing the door open wider, he looked outside to see that the parking lot was gone, filled with a void of darkness. He looked down the walls and saw the adjacent motel rooms to his, filled in with the same grey as his room. He hesitantly made his way down the walkway towards room 4. He saw a faint glow of light emanating from the slightly cracked open door. Peering through the door, Frank saw a middle-aged man in a black suit standing atop an end table. "I'm sorry, I just can't anymore," the man sobbed, voice trembling. Frank noticed the noose, tightly wrapped around the man's neck, tethered to a beam above. Frantically, he burst through the door and lunged at the man to stop him. As he reached towards the man, Frank stumbled forward and went through him as if he were smoke. Falling to the floor, Frank looked back, and he could see the man had kicked the end table away. The rope snapped taut, and the man swung lifeless like a pendulum. Then, just as quickly, everything vanished. The room blinked back to its original state, the table upright, the man back in place, tears still streaming down his face. The loop began again. Frank stayed low, watching in stunned silence. The grief etched into the man's face was bottomless, like he'd been repeating this final moment for eternity. Leaving room 4 behind, Frank made his way toward room 2, dread tightening in his chest. The door was ajar, just like before. That same faint, sickly glow spilled out into the walkway. He hesitated at the threshold, hoping, praying the room would be empty. Peering inside, he saw no one. Relief flickered, but the bed was rumpled, scattered with women's clothing and accessories. with heels on the floor, a purse half unzipped, and makeup brushed across the sheets as if someone had left in a hurry. Clink! Frank jumped at the sudden sound of something small hitting tile. It came from the bathroom. He stepped forward, each footfall heavier than the last, and moved toward the partially open bathroom door. Sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall, was a woman wearing a light blue tank top and jeans. Her eyes were glassy. Her head was leaning lazily to one side. She was holding a pill bottle. More bottles were scattered around her, some open, others spilled across the bathroom tile, little white pills lying like bones in dust. In a final, feeble attempt to speak, Frank heard her whisper, "They will appreciate me when I'm gone." Her voice was barely audible, like breath escaping a cracked window. She tilted her head back and emptied a fresh bottle into her mouth, swallowing the pills dry. Her breathing slowed and her eyes fluttered. Then stillness. A blink. Suddenly she was sitting upright again, the same bottle in her hand. The floor reset. The pills were back. The line repeated, "They'll appreciate me when I'm gone." Frank stepped back, heart pounding. He was watching death on repeat. Seeing enough death, Frank ran to the front desk, desperate for answers, or at least an escape. To his surprise, someone was tending to the counter, a man, but when he turned to face Frank, it stopped him dead in his tracks. The clerk's face looked as if it had been blown apart from underneath. His lower jaw twisted, shredded, barely held together by shadow and sinew. And yet, he smiled. He wasn't in a loop. He was aware. The clerk reached towards Frank with a gnarled hand. "Enjoying your stay, Mr. Marsherton?" he rasped. Frank stood his ground. "What kind of fucked up place is this? What happened to those people?" The clerk's head tilted unnaturally. "All is right. They came here for the same reasons you did." No, they didn't deserve this." Frank's voice cracked, angry and afraid. "They're trapped, tormented, stuck in their last moments. You need to let them go. Now." The lights above flickered. The clerk's smile widened, skin stretching where no jaw should be. Frank stumbled backward as the man began to shapeshift, arms stretching unnaturally, fingers splitting and elongating like tendrils reaching for him. "Come now, Mr. Marsherton," the voice rasped, growing harsher, more fragmented. "You belong here. Do what you came to do." Frank turned and bolted out of the office, heart hammering. The walkway ahead stretched, warping like rubber beneath his feet. The numbered doors glowed with a hot, white light. From behind each one, screams tore through the air, voices of the dead, trapped in endless suffering. He ran harder and faster, each step feeling slower than the last. Behind him, the clerk was no longer a man. The thing had sprouted too many arms, its limbs spidered along the ceiling, its head turned full around as it pursued him, smiling with a jaw that no longer existed. The creature screeched, a sound like metal tearing through bone, and it lunged. Frank dove into room 6, eyes fixed on the hatch-shaped void in the ceiling. He jumped and missed. Gasping, he scrambled back to the front door and slammed it shut, just as the creature's silhouette loomed outside. He shoved the bed beneath the hatch, leapt onto the mattress and reached upward, still too far. Thinking fast, he dragged both end tables across the room, stacking them on the bed. The furniture groaned under his weight as he climbed the shaky tower, the mattress shifting beneath him with every move. The window exploded behind him. Shards of glass rained down as the creature smashed through, its tendrils whipping toward him. One brushed his ankle as he pulled himself into the void. And then darkness. Back in his room, the real room, Frank grabbed his backpack and the manila envelope, hands still shaking. He bolted for his truck, started the engine, and peeled out of the parking lot without looking back. As quickly as he had arrived, he was gone, alive, and certain he would never return to the Restmore Inn. Sometime later, beneath the same flickering neon sign, a disheveled man walks into the Restmore Inn and asks the front desk clerk for a room. The front desk clerk looked up, a smile stretched wide. "Only got one room available, room number 6.